Now, I know Mr. Cannings and Ms. Sinclair Deguenet were talking about the public service pensions earlier. If I was a public service employee, knowing it's the same people nominally in charge as this, I'd be scared silly. But good thing for them, the actual taxpayers are on the hook for public sector pensions. So even though there is a surplus, it doesn't affect the public servants one bit. Just the same as if there was a deficit, it would not affect them one bit because they're guaranteed by legislation. The same with the pre-2005 pensions, which is not funded separately as post-2005. Pre-2005 is just funded out of basically general revenue. If you look at the actuarial statement for the year, it does show the two funds separately. I think the 2005 one is underfunded by $7 billion. So that should actually even be applied to the post-2005, which actually technically would bring the surplus below the 25%. So if anything, the argument is, why is the government trying to take that $1.9 billion in surplus, and what are they taking it for? The argument shouldn't be that there's a surplus, it should go back to employees, or should go back to with lower payments. As there is one public servant, there's one taxpayer, there are two funds, one is unfunded, one is overfunded. Why don't they count the deficit against the surplus, as any of us would do? If you have a bank account and a mortgage, you don't say, hey, I've got $10,000 in the bank, look how rich I am if you've got a mortgage of $10 million, or $10 million. You count the two of them together. So do companies, but the government counts these two separately. So again, to my colleagues, Mr. Cannings and Ms. Sinclair Deguenet, I think the questioning should be not what are they doing with their surplus, but how are they claiming it as a surplus? The government changed the law in 2019 in the budget, changed what the surplus would be. I wish we had officials here to explain why the 2005 unfunded portion is not being counted against that supposed surplus. And again, what is their intent to do with that money? Roll it in to reduce the deficit? Was Mark Carney going to step in and say, well, that was Chrystia Freeland's mistake at $61 billion. Look, we're in surplus. Look, we found $2 billion. I wish we could find out. We could find out next week in meetings, or 2 weeks in meetings, 3 weeks in meetings, but we won't find out if the Liberals have their way. Getting back actually to the public service pension, I wish we could actually have a bit more transparency about that fund. As I mentioned, they don't actually own stocks and bonds like a lot of us think they actually have. When they declare that their fund is up X percent, it's based a bit on market capitalization and based on, I think, Kentucky windage, but not an actual firm amount. The Auditor General actually referred to it in her notes from her last public accounts report from last year, concerns about how they were working out their their valuations. The same with CPP, how they actually come up with their funding. And speaking of CPP, I wish we had the officials here we could ask again, as I do each year, about how the government works out their lowest net GDP. Because when the government talks about their net GDP, they count the CPP money as an asset, but they don't count the liabilities, what they owe to grandma, grandpa, myself in 5 years. Unfortunately, I'm that old. But they don't count the obligations, but they count the assets. And so when the former and fired finance minister would stand in the House and say, we have the best net GDP ratio in the G7, it's not, well, it's true under her formulation. And as the former Deputy Minister for Finance said a couple years ago, it uses mental gymnastics to come up with that number. The Fraser Institute uses numbers, this is an IMF, says you can use this, but when you use OECD calculations, we're actually 22nd out of 29. We're the 7th worst for debt to GDP what brings down our debt to GDP is counting CPP. So I actually posed the question. It was Mr. Sabia at the time, was the deputy minister, and his ADM. You know, the only way you can count the CPP as an asset is if you have access to use it. And Mr. Sabia actually started, well, yes, that is. And then he caught himself because he did not want to say the truth, which is you can only count that asset, the CPP, the money set aside for seniors, paid for by seniors and their companies, not paid for by the government, but half paid for by taxpayers and half paid by their company into the fund. The only way you could count it for financial or accounting reasons, according to the IMF, is if the government could access that money for operational reasons. And that is the dirty secret about the government stating their net GDP ratio is the lowest in the G7. Yes, the U.S. is a basket case, but you can never count the U.S. out, and it doesn't take much for them to flip things around like Bill Clinton did. He actually ran surpluses. They have the ability to gear up. Germany actually, I think, when you look at their numbers, actually has a lower net debt to GDP than us, and they've just announced $100 billion in tax cuts, so they actually will be moving further ahead. But we're only net, we can claim we're only the lowest when you count the money for the CPP. I think it's $700 billion, but you don't count the liability. So anyone who's watching at home who is collecting CPP, or perhaps your parents are collecting CPP, know this: when the government talks about having the lowest net debt to GDP, it's because they are counting not what's owed to our seniors, but what is set aside for the seniors, knowing that they can only count it in accounting lingo if they have access to the CPP for operational reasons. I don't think the government's going to do that. It would be suicide, and I'm not saying the Liberals would, but they're lying to Canadians when they're saying we have the lowest debt to GDP. If we compare it to the OECD, apples to apples, we are 22nd out of 29. We are the 7th worst for debt to GDP. I see the chair's
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Fogg, I'm going to interrupt you. I just, we are out of resources, but I'm going to take 30 seconds. In the spirit of transparency, Mr. Durian, this is not out of spite. I'd already signaled this to one other opposition member. I am planning to have meetings in January. The week of January 2 over 7 and 9, and several over 20 to 23rd. You'll be receiving notices on this. So I have endeavored to work the best I can with the schedule the government has outlined on these documents.
Point of order,
and I am
Chair.
sorry they do not line up
Chair.
with your schedule. This meeting is adjourned.
Point of order, Chair. Yeah, right. Wonder who used